So this isn't the standard kind of TV interview. It's like just we just go where we will, and I've already said all this.
Okay.
So if you just tell us who you are and what you do.
My name's John Clark. I'm art director at Sony Cambridge.
Okay.
My job is varied, really, but it's broadly giving shape and direction to the visuals in games.
Okay. What do you think that is meant out there on the streets, not in relation to games, but just out there in general about high definition? What do you think people think it is?
I think I think opinions split into two. I think there are those who think that it is an excuse to make more money off people, and people are confused as to what it is, except for another expensive piece of kit that they're going to feel obliged to get at some point or another. I think there are other people who see it as an exciting increase in visual fidelity, and I think the majority feel that it is an expensive peripheral that they are going to buy at some point, and a minority think of it as that advancement in visual fidelity.
Okay, it's interesting. You said exactly the two words that I was going to go right in the centre of that mass of words that started and ended was visual fidelity. It was also at the end now. Visual fidelity. Tell me what you think that means.
What I think it means, or what I think that the people promoting HD means. I mean, I think that visual fidelity is a complicated idea. I think that on the ground, basically, it means we see more pictures or areas of pictures that were previously closed to us are now opened up to us, and so it's about detail, and on a wider scale I think it's about truth and about honesty and about I was talking this morning, I think it's about, there are notions of democracy sort of within it. There are notions, it seems to me entirely appropriate that we have HD, see everything, nothing is hidden from you. And you take that phrase, nothing is hidden from you, this, the message of HD, and you apply it to a different context, any political debate, and it sits very appropriately. It's kind of a super, is the what's the word I'm looking for? The ultimate piece of technology for a society which worries itself silly about being lied to.
Okay. I mean, one of your colleagues mentioned the notion that actually HD is kind of dangerous because in the morality of the game and the morality of the democratic and outside world, then the problem of too much detail is that possibly putting into the hands of the young are things that shouldn't be in the hands of the young. I mean, is there an issue? Is there a problem around that? I mean, gore.
I think there's a huge issue there. I think that there is HD. Just to develop on the idea of HD and visual fidelity, HD is part of a reflex within our society towards simulation, which is different to representation. Simulation is about, good simulations are judged in terms of how close to something they are. What have they got in? Representation is largely a process of filtering about what is left out. So the issue of gore is really fascinating, because in our representations of people and what happens to people on screen, which is generally they die gruesome deaths, certainly in video games, it is entirely possible. I'm mixing 2 points up here, but let me disentangle them. There is the this notion of simulation, which I'll come back to. The question of quantity and visual gore is fascinating, because games take much longer to make these days. People are specialising in smaller and smaller parts of those games, and given that games are supposed to be the eventual replacement of our daily lives, it's entirely possible to imagine a future not too far away where somebody will spend their entire day thinking of how to best represent brains dribbling down walls. How are we going to do that? That's what they're going to do the job. It won't be any longer. These days you have damage guys, you have, you know, background people, you have character people, and you have damage people. But we're going to start having, you know, character damage people, people who are attuned and expert in thinking about how best to represent damaged people. And then we might start breaking that down even further as the demands that HD brings with it of this fidelity. People examine. It amazes me how Joe Schmo public examine the edges in games. You know, the technology underlying games. How porous is the illusion? How porous is the illusion? People, yeah, no, but that edge, you've seen that edge, they've not got the normal map on it, they've not got the coverage on it, they've not got this. It's part of the audience expectations. So it seems to me inevitable that this increased specialisation will lead to this warping of people's lives. You know, more people will have to be brought in to make the games. People will spend their daily lives thinking of the strangest things, and the impact of that on those people who will be doing that will be really interesting to see. I don't think it'll be a good one.
Can we talk about the issue of photo realism? I mean, why is there an implicit assumption in detail and in greater resolutions, as your point from earlier, that it has to go to the photorealistic? What is the preoccupation? Where's it coming from, and where's it going to?
Because of this instinct towards simulation. You know, the notions of representation, sophisticated high-level notions of representation, realism in painting, they have been left behind. The impulse these days, and it's an uninterrogated one, but it is an irresistible one, if you like, is towards simulation, towards the replacement of the real, rather than the interpretation of the real. You know, representation is the interpretation of what's out there. It's entirely possible to do an analysis of realism in painting or in sculpture, and to explore many different things. You know, people go in different ways. People look at different things. Simulation is monolithic and simple. You know, it's the eventual desire to create the one-to-one map of the world. You know, which is why people, ironically, are dissatisfied with the games that are being produced now, notwithstanding the fact that they are much more realistic than they were in the last generation. Because until we get a one-to-one mapping of the world, our simulations will have failed. So we're just swimming into failure, you know, and we're putting off success, if you like.
Well, that has to bring up the issue of about there's some kind of inverse proportional relationship between veracity and gameplay, the pleasure of gameplay. Can you talk a little about that? Because if the eventual aim is one-to-one, which is kind of sort of pointless because we are one-to-one essentially.
Yeah, but it's the replacement. It is the substitution of this lived reality with the virtual reality. But the virtual reality, with the eventual replacement, it kind of the Matrix. You know, we'll all be in bubbles. You know, with cables out there, but you know, and the reality's got to be entirely convincing. You know, I don't think it's a good thing, but I think that it is difficult to resist in terms of how that impacts on gameplay. Very, very difficult. Very, very difficult to disentangle the technological drive towards simulation from traditional notions of gameplay. You get purists who will talk about the bastardization or the marginalization of gameplay in favour of the visuals, and everybody will agree because it's a difficult point to disagree with. Everybody knows it's kind of a bit fucked, but there's nobody that knows how to stop it. There's nobody that knows how to stop it. And there are two reasons for it, but one reason is that it is pious and probably not nonsense, but it is overly pious.
Let me just do something here, because I want to know that, but let's just make sure that you are covered.
All right.
Oh, stop it wobbling. So, the first reason.
Yeah, it's this notion that you can disentangle the visuals from the game mechanic. to some extent, I mean, this echoes discussions we've been having in the art world since, you know, time immemorial. You know, kind of like the difference between the idea. Is it important that the artist makes the thing that they exhibit? You know, people are shocked and horrified when they find out that whichever artist it might be Louis Bourgeois always makes me laugh. Louis Bourgeois didn't actually carve that marble. She did. She's 85. You know, in a similar way, it is there is a discussion that happens in games that seeks to separate gameplay from the visuals. And I think, given modern sensibilities, given the depth in which technology is embedded within society, the separation of game mechanic from the excitement around technology itself, the what's being represented, the way it's being represented, how good are those bump maps, how good is that lighting these days, is frankly ridiculous. You know, it's not like we're not making chess anymore. You know, we're not even doing Pac-Man anymore. We've moved from a symbolic approach to the visuals in games, which was entirely sufficient and didn't demand anything more to complete itself. You know, these weren't bad representations. These were entirely sufficient representations. What's changed is that the target has changed. So those people who get stuck in sort of debates about the purity of gameplay and the way in which, like, you know, the visuals has overwhelmed gameplay and games are bad. These miss the point, because the point is we're no longer trying to make the things that we made when, you know, people were making Pac-Man. The whole aim is much more complex, much more layered, much more difficult to control. But one thing you can't do is take the visuals out of it and take the seduction of the visuals out of it, because people expect that, and to not deliver on that will cause people to cheer in one tiny little corner of the world, and even they will probably be slightly disappointed with the lack of, you know, swishing swords, or, you know, spurting brains, or beautiful sunsets, or whatever it is, that kind of like the rest of the games will be filled in at that time.
So there's a way in which the high definition replication of the world, simulation of the world, is quite appropriate.
I think it's inevitable. It's the medium. It's about. I mean, if I think anything about how it's that simulation and the impulse towards simulation is directing almost everything, and HD is entirely appropriate given the uninterrogated desires that drive games. It's not for nothing. People in games companies, a lot of people don't think about lots of things, but you know, they're not stupid. They may not have a critical framework. There's not a critical framework that surrounds games really in the same way that there is in other spheres. You know, in literature, in film, in painting, and but it is an energetic medium full of clever people who are doing what seems appropriate within the context. You know, and if art is about anything, it's about working intelligently within the context. You know, sometimes working against it, sometimes working with it. The difference within games, I suppose, is that the companies within games will never work against it. You know, there's no opposition within it, but they work intelligently within it. And HD is entirely appropriate given the goals of games at many different levels.
So it's pretty accepted now that the logistics of games have had to change to cope with the detail demanded and veracity. I'm kind of interested in the use of the word veracity and truth, those terms that you use, because actually most of the time it seems to me, correct me if I'm wrong, there's a manifestation of a virtual world, so an imagined world. So we're talking about veracity and truth, and we have imagined worlds. But is there some kind of forgetting gameplay for a second? Well, not forgetting gameplay. You can't forget gameplay and the way that the worlds are imagined. Is there a way in which the production process the increased levels of necessity of resources is actually damaging the whole raison d'etre for the games industry itself.
Well, it's making it more difficult to understand what's happened. I don't know whether this, I think this probably does answer the question. 20 years ago, a group of people, generally guys, sitting around in a bedroom could put together a game that was brilliant and that would win plaudits all over the place. These days, obviously, team sizes have got lots bigger in order to fill up the consoles and to do justice to the HD screens. It's as a logistical exercise, is an order of magnitude more difficult. Communication becomes a huge issue. So the making of games has become more difficult because you don't know. Two things, I suppose, are happening. It's more difficult to communicate clearly, intuitively to large groups of people. Doesn't happen anymore. It's caused huge problems, but it's caused huge problems on a logistical level and also on a thematic level. You know, the product in games these days, themes that are considered worthy of spending the many millions of pounds that it would take to put out the game are becoming vanishingly small. First-person shooters dominate the shelves these days in a way that they never used to, because one thing that the games industry knows is that first-person shooters sell. And in that way, it's kind of ruined games a bit, I suppose, or caused decisions to be made in favour of a particular direction. Yeah.
So basically, one of the things that's going on a corporate and a commercial level is that the spectacular is a basic condition of the authorization of a game to go ahead.
Yes.
Just because of the detail issue. What do you think about the notions spoken of by people like Raoul van Eygen? I take it you the situationists, the whole proposition about the society of the spectacle, and we are within the society of the spectacle, because here comes the media, here comes new digital technologies. I mean, it seems to me that you are utterly cognizant of the space that you're functioning within, but actually your understanding almost would usually prohibit engaging with an area if you have that understanding of it. What's going on with you?
Well, no, because I think the difference is that it comes back to another part of a point that I started making earlier on but got lost within, and it is this notion of seduction. If the art world or art forms outside with significant critical frameworks surrounding them are characterised by anything, it is by a suspicion of seduction. And if games and films, mainstream films, do anything, it is embrace seduction. And I think there's a really interesting discussion to be had there, because one of the reasons that games are being made, despite the fact that the majority of game developers are suspicious themselves about the validity of the processes we now feel obliged to engage in, it's because that other part of ourselves is the 9-year-old boy in the kitchen with the mother, and we want to show our pretty pictures. You know, here's a drawing. We can, like, you know, that we have this relationship with the skepticism isn't total. The skepticism isn't total. You know, in our time off, we enjoy the spectacle. And I think that it is. I was thinking about this the other day, and I was thinking about Germaine Greer at Town Bloody Hall. Remember Town Bloody Hall, where she stood up and she's talking to.
Is that thing? What you have to watch is the.
Oh right.
I was thinking, bloody hell. No, let's reframe and restart. So
all I wanted to say, I was talking about seduction, and I thought that the best way of describing the kind of ambivalence that I feel in games, and ambivalence that I think many people within games feel within games is Germaine Greer, when she was talking to Norman Mailer in that thing Town Bloody Hall, and she talked about how while she was attacking and in a sense wanted to kill. I mean, I mean, it was a brilliant piece of theatre. I don't think to use the word kill, but she wanted to overturn the status quo. She wanted to attack everything he represented. She, at the same time, loved and adored and aspired to be him. And I think that in this context, is a perfect description of where a lot of us are in games.
Given all the above,
Yeah.
where do you see the next phase going?
Well, I think what will happen, we were talking about it this morning up in the on the studio floor. I think what will happen is that we will start representing non-HD. You know, there will be a strand of development which will hark back to the age before HD. So I think that we will start making filters that look a little bit like softening the picture to make it look like it does these days. We'll understand actually what our television pictures look like now better in a few years' time than we do now. They'll become very visible to us, and we will try to recreate them on HD. And this is all entirely in line with the point I was making earlier about simulation. We'll just try and recreate this past world in sort of, you know, perfectly. I think that if that's one strand, I think the other strand will be an ever more desperate demand for detail and fidelity, allied with a growing distrust of you know what it is that we are showing. I just think those things will go hand in hand. I don't know how much more information we're going to be able to provide of skin. People understand skin now in ways that people never understood skin, never even thought about skin.
Let me just help here possibly with something, which is that what happened with 35mm film before HD came along was that 35mm was widely accepted in the cinematographic community as representing in 4K resolution. So not just 2K, but 4K, right up the top there. But the problem is that the lenses is too damn good. The stock is too damn good. So it's the job of the director of photography to in some way hack, destroy, wreck the clarity of the medium. So you started talking there about potential filters for rendering the thing that destroys atmosphere or immersiveness is too much clarity.
Absolutely.
So can you kind of talk about that in relation to the act of the clarity or lack of clarity necessary for good gaming?
Well, that's what we're doing now. If I think back at what we're putting together an HD teaser right now, and I spend all of my time softening it up, pushing it back, and I don't know whether I can say more about it than that, because it seems clear to me that the reason for doing that is that detail becomes like noise that sort of that irritates the back of your eye. I think that an example that people will often talk about in relation to that is porn. But pornography has been woven into the development of new technologies and has been responsible for the uptake of technologies, and it has been determinant to some extent in the uptake of new technologies. It's going to be interesting to see developments in porn, if you like, because I think that the reflex to soften will be absolute. Will be absolute, because frankly nobody's going to be interested in the super sharp clarity, because it will become frankly disgusting within that context. In a more diluted way, exactly the same thing applies to games. It will apply to films, and so it is an interesting thing how the technology is sort of pulling in a direction, and will be pulling in another.
So you're kind of talking about the pornography of the spectacle.
Well, I don't know whether I'm talking about the pornography of the spectacle. I'm talking about the ways in which we, the pornography industry will be, I think, very resistant to HD.
Yeah, I got your point. I was trying to be contentious
All
and
right.
trying to lead you down a bad track. Given that the game is to be spectacular.
Well, I mean, I think that pornography as a concept, I think pornography as an idea, is one that is overwhelming and ever present, sort of within society, and I don't think that there's a lot of resistance left. The spectacle is kind of has won. I think that you see it in products outside of all the critical positions that used to be legitimate and championed proudly outside of mainstream are no longer as confidently held, because everybody has been sucked up into this in the direction that we're going. So in a sense, it's a strange inversion that's happened over the last few years.
Is AI keeping up? I'm sorry, this instantly which is it's something that came up earlier, which is, so you've got this kind of this detail, this photorealistic detail occurring, and then the characters, that somebody presses a button and the character's asked to do something which presumably some AI comes in and executes. For instance, and I said this earlier, basically executes a somersault.
Yeah.
But of course, does the acts of the AI, can it keep pace with the detail of the depiction?
Well, there are two things. I don't think it matters so much whether the AI keeps up or not. I think it matters a lot whether the shapes keep up. AI doesn't keep up at the moment, and it's got to get lots better as we populate our games more with more people. Then it's going to be important that they are believable, and that actions that we're not in control of take place that enrich our understanding of whatever environment that we're in. More important is that we do dynamic shape deformation very poorly in CG generally.
Can you just tell us what dynamic shape deformation is?
I mean, you take a body. We move our arms. We've got clothes. It changes when we move around. We can't do that very well in games. We don't do it very well in film. And the reason that that's bad in relation to HD is because we do everything else quite well. Rendering hard surfaces quite well, rendering panoramas quite well, rendering hard cars and everything, all of that really well actually. But we do deformation really badly, and that breaks the illusion. So if your point is that AI is not keeping up, or implicit in your point is that AI is not keeping up and therefore the illusion is broken, it will stop, this eventual complete immersion. That's true to an extent, but I think far more immediate concern, if that total immersion and the complete illusion is important, is our poor handling of deformation. What you tend to have is lots of attention paid to faces, right? And they can look kind of okay sometimes, so long as they don't turn too quickly and everything else like that. But it's kind of as good as we can get. But rubbish bodies that still look sort of slightly cardboard, cutouty, and plasticine against this fantastically looking car. Beautiful, shiny, glistening gleam, everything else, or in an environment with all this mist rolling around.
So it's an issue around articulation, because the wheels move but the body stays the same. So that's okay. But if you've got something where it all moves, then it's problematic.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Okay. It's a huge issue. It's a huge issue because we've not got the processing power to do it. Neither have we actually got the methodologies. And the reason, this goes back to this point, I don't want to keep banging on about simulation, but it goes back to an issue of simulation. We tend to build systems from the ground up. So we build a car, so take a human, we build a skeleton. So we've got bones that go inside, and then we will build a skin on top of that. And then we will attach the skin to the bones. And then if we want clothes, these will be naked, then we'll build the clothes, and we'll put the clothes on top, and we'll attach the skin to the bones, get them deforming in a certain way. And then the success or failure of that representation depends on how well we model mathematically the dynamics of cloth, or the dynamic, and then how well we model the dynamics of this sort of cloth as against this sort of cloth with this sort of cut against this. People spend their working years working through these things, and that's because it is seen as a problem of simulation, a series of discrete systems which we layer one on top of the other. And I think there's a very strong argument for saying, bugger that, let's just deal with a limit. Let's just deal with the outside. You know, I'm not interested when I'm looking at you in what your clavicle is doing and how the skin that slides over, you know, whatever bones we're talking about sliding over. It's that I'm interested in what's happening on this surface. You know, so we can generalize the problem in that way rather than sort of dealing with it in discrete ways. But that means adopting an approach which has much more in common with traditional notions in sculpture and painting, realist sculpture and painting, than notions of simulation, where these discrete systems that pile on top of each other are important.
Okay, this is me trying to understand something. So it may or may not have a response, but here goes. McLuhan, the medium is the message, which is quite an astute kind of insight for the time. And it's worn well until recently. And the problem is, recently, is with digitality, there are quite a lot of people that are in denial of the digital as being a medium at all. And there are all kinds of justifications about end exhibition as the medium and all this stuff. But it crossed my mind that if you said, well, okay, digitality is about a series of inputs into a realm of mathematics, so there's a representation of the data as maths. If you then went back to the original definition of media, and you took a simple act like wood, doing some sculpture in wood, that if you cut down a tree, and if you then cut it smaller because you wanted to work with a bit, and then you stripped the bark, and you started carving at the shape, and you made the shape, and then you oiled the wood, and you took it. You started coughing last time at that point. And in other words, you went through a series of processes with the wood, which is the medium, and there's all this issue about truth to media and all of that, truth to mediums. That if you then took the wood out of the equation, what you've got is a series of processes. Now, what if you took the notion of the series of processes over into the digital realm, which all it is a series of processes, and you redefined it as a medium in that sense, then what message would this digital medium have? What would be the changing of the content through this medium? Or is it utterly and completely neutral? And just to chuck into the mix, one of the issues that we've already talked about with HD is a kind of form of transparency, because what you're trying to do is create a clear window.
No, I think it's really fascinating. I know exactly what you mean, and I think, and I'm going to come at it from a particular. I wrote something a little while back that was about that asked the question: why have 3D models on the computer never been used significantly, you know, to any great extent in the art world? Why has 3D not been taken up in the art world? It's really fascinating. 3D's not really been touched. Video has. 3D hasn't been touched, and I think there are lots and lots of reasons why that might be. But one of the reasons might be, and it's a smaller reason, but and it's got to, and it attaches to this notion of the material's raw characteristics, which is something that you were talking about there when you take away the wood. We take away the wood, I don't know whether you're left with anything. You think of Duchamp, you know, you couldn't do a Duchamp, you couldn't do the urinal. You couldn't do the urinal in 3D. You could make the urinal in 3D. It's an interesting exhibition idea I once had about making kind of like Duchamp's you know, urinal in 3D and sort of presenting it in some sort of way. You have all sorts of issues about how you're going to present that. You know, after having made the urinal, you know, after maybe you found the plans. You know, maybe you go whatever. You have all sorts of issues about how to present it, or you think about the appetite that people have for things like Rodin. Why do we like Rodin? Well, don't even like Rodin. We like clay because of the tension that exists between the material and the thing that's being represented. We like operating on the edge, going, oh, it's clay. Oh no, it's not. It's skin. Oh no, it's not. It's oh no, it's not. And it kind of this is what we like, which is why. And this is a modern appetite, relatively modern appetite, where we like to see the paint as well as what is represented. Now, I think that the problem with 3D or anything digital, and its strength, is its utter neutrality. You know, there is no very strong material that you dialogue with. You have to pour everything into it. It can become everything. This is its peculiar quality. It can become everything, but it is nothing. It is nothing, and so there's none of the satisfactions that result from taking a block of clay. I'm going to stick with clay because it's a really good example. Take a block of clay, you go like that, you make a rubbish little model out of clay. It's really rubbish, but people look at it and go, oh, that's nice, isn't it? And what they're responding to is not what you've done there. They're responding to what maybe you're trying to do, but also the clayness. And people like the physicality of it, the clayness. They see your thumbprint, and people like that personal dialogue that they might have with the process. They see the history of making. And it's the history of making that is missing when you're working in 3D. If you work in 3D, you could show people, I suppose, to some extent, some history, but you would have to do it by taking screen grabs. You think it would be entirely contrived and rubbish. You know, it's not embedded within the thing at the end. What you would have to do, actually, is reintroduce it at the end. And in that sense, again, we're entering realms of simulation. You know, painting programs on the. It occurred to me when I was writing this thing. It occurred to me that, in actual fact, when we say we're working in 3D, you have to, as an operator, as an artist in front of you already have to suspend your disbelief in front of this screen, because you're clearly not working in 3D. You are working on the top of many disguised and clever mathematical processes. So there is even on the part of the creator, this initial suspension of disbelief, this willingness to believe, this willingness to embrace the seductive power of the tools in the first place, that kind of hamstrings any attempts to sort of be critical within the process. And there are groups of I think, you know, slightly sorry artists out there, call themselves cyber artists, who are trying to make sort of cyber sculptures, you know, and they show their work at SIGGRAPH. And I met some of them, and I went to, you know, these, and it's just, I applaud what it is they're trying, but I just think that they haven't recognised the fact that it's all made up. You know, it's not really, you know, 3D. So I think what you're left with, if you take away the wood, is nothing. And this is why it's such an onerous and, at the end of the day, potentially dangerous medium to work in. You need to put everything in there. There is no longer a dialogue. There is no longer a dialogue as there would be with real materials that have certain characteristics, a real person who you're disagreeing with. There is the computer. It rarely wants to do what you want it to do. But there is this extra pressure on people to decide what they want to do, you know, to decide what they want to do, and to be, and that it's, and for those reasons, I think people don't take it up very much outside of professional context, where its uses are very, very clear, you know, which is to put out, you know, seductive, rich, moving images that can play with people.
Can I conclude from that if in 50 years' time somebody were to look back, they might just see where many people see no medium at all, they might just see a medium? Many contemporary people see no medium as. Because I got from what you were saying there. I got from what you were saying that you do actually think there is something of a medium to be had.
I think there is process. I think what you said earlier to start that off was fine. I think there are a series of processes. So in a sense, for me, who as an artist was very process driven, you know, I like processes. I think processes are really interesting. I like the games industry not because I like games, because there's a fascinating process of actually putting together games. Brilliant. If people could see that and partake of that, then that would be genuinely exciting. But so yes, in terms of processes, this is a medium. Games, very different to film. Very, very different to film. One of the reasons I like working in games rather than film is because of the many layers of complexity within that, and the emergent nature of those processes.
All right. So we've got to go there.
Yeah.
If you were prepared to go to the McLuhan thing, then you have to. I have to lead you to the Walter Benjamin or Walter Benjamin thing, which is the issue around the very simple description of the issue of does the replicant, the replication, does the copy hold any of the truth of the original when you're in a realm where there is no original? There's a simulation of imaginary originals, but there is effective...
I'll tell you a really interesting story in relation to that.
Got to come off that keyboard.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. A friend of mine, working in games, decided that he wanted to make some paintings. And because he thought, you know, there's a kind of romantic notion sort of within games, people that have been in games all the time, that you know, there's something better out there, you know, something more authentic, and they wanted to make some paintings. And then he did but he wasn't quite sure what to paint, and so what he did was, but he wanted to be working with the real paint, the real stuff, not this fake stuff, real stuff. So what he did was he painted all these paintings on the computer, right, and then copied the paintings from the computer onto canvases, and they were abstracts. It was brilliant, and I thought in that really simple process that is, and he did it entirely for practical reasons, for convenience. He had set up this really interesting question, which was, where is the original? Where is the original? The reason why people, you know, make paintings, sell paintings, and you know, and the reason they're sold for such a lot of money is because of this notion of, you know, the interface between the artist and the painting, and the fact that there is original and there's lots of copies and blah blah like that. But all the thinking, all the important stuff had happened in front of the screen, and then there had been this translation. So I don't know where the original was in that situation. I don't know. Well, I'm fairly sure actually it was on the computer, or it was, you know, it was Simon's name was. It was there. And so in that sense, the real thing became the copy. The real thing was the copy, which I thought was fascinating. In terms of what validity has the copy when there is no original, I think that I'm thinking of a tree here. So is the question: you making a tree, you're making a street, you're making a city. How does that resonate beside a real city? Is that part of the question?
It could be. I think you pursue it, see where you get to.
I think that insofar as I think that the purpose, the unwritten, the unspoken drive and purpose within games, particularly, is the replacement of any notional real thing that's out there. I think absolutely it will have. It works in utterly conceptual realm, and absolutely it does. If you make a dog, it needs to occupy the length of breadth of the idea of dog in your head, whether or not it's a copy from a real dog. Generally, it will be a copy from a real dog. People don't make a lot up in games, which is interesting.
So in a sense, the HD issue, because I think we're coming towards we're getting to that point of circumlocuting the whole subject. That is there anything more to be said, really? Have you anything that you want to say about high? Because my charge is high definition, and we've explored the kind of the problematic of game and representation and real and unreal and all that stuff. So to put a kind of final tie onto this whole thing, is the HD issue? Is it just a temporary issue that we have because we've come up to HD, or is it ever increasing definition the central issue that's got to happen from now on?
Oh yeah, no, I think that it is part of the zeitgeist. I think it's where we're at. It's what the appetite is. I think how we deal with it going forward will be very interesting. We won't have the resource to satisfy the demands, and neither will we have the skills in terms of the logistical skills to put out games of the fidelity that are being expected. Or in order to do so, most people who now are performing different jobs in different spheres will be brought into the making of games. You know, it is that in order to achieve our goals, this sort of immersive environment, everybody eventually will be involved in it in one way or shape. Everybody will be involved in it, and we will all. And you can see it, you know, in tiny ways in Second Life, in these online games where these realities are being constructed. And I think eventually that will become all-consuming. And I think that I have this little theory that the games market expands in direct relation to the employees, of the number of employees within games. I think that there are huge amounts of people who play games who don't make games. I think most people that buy games are involved in one way, shape or form in the making of them. I'd be really interested to see what the overlap is. I don't think.
You mean even in terms of having an opinion is part of the making?
No. I think that people that don't play games won't be anywhere near the industry. But the industry is growing. The industry is growing a great deal, and I think that it's growing and incorporating its audience, and that there's not very much. There's a penumbra probably outside of that.
You've hit the centre of the unspoken centre of my quest for HD, because all of us that are involved in digitality, whether it be from the games level or the HD level or wavelet theory and dust particles and planetary masses and all of that stuff, everybody is in search of this, to my mind, the digital truth of which is that we are in some way in our pursuits trying to expand our inner world into the outer world. Is that what you meant about simulations and replications, and is that what you're talking about?
No, because that's a much more positive spin than I would put on it. I think that in doing so, because I think that's absolutely right, what you're saying, but I regard that as, slightly suspiciously. I see that as I'm slightly suspicious of it. Not quite as, I think what you said sounded quite optimistic to me. It was kind of a little bit all to do with empowerment, and it suggested a coming together. And I think that there will be a coming together in terms of production, because it's going to be very difficult to make these things. But I don't see a sort of the psychic, imaginative coming together that you seem to be implying.
This is as far as I understand it, what you've just asked. Loosely and quickly put, what happened was that music thinking got into TV and film thinking. In other words, the technology gave a means of a democratic means of production to a certain sector, which then has come into an area which has been historically owned by the corporations. And the question is there some way in which user-generated technology, or the use of technology can be obtained by, if you like, potential games makers, so that it produces some kind of crack in the corporate war?
Well, I think yes and no. I mean, Second Life is a good example of user technology, and the ways in which people are engaging with that. That's interesting. In terms of, and I think that's going to explode. Second Life, online gaming, modding. Will get big. It's died a bit of a death, but I think it's going to become massive on the
Modding
on the
of
internet.
games engines, you mean?
Yeah. But I think that games are very different beasts. It's very different to film and any linear medium. Films, books, television are front-loaded productions. You have a director and a small group of people who will make all the decisions as far ahead of production as possible. The production comes along, and then it happens. You know, and logistics might get in the way. It might be extended. Games are backloaded things. Nobody, frankly, knows what's going to be fun in a game until 3/4 of the way into it, and it's because of the tactile nature of games, control, and everything else. Now, it's possible to imagine, and the thing that allows this technology to get into the hands of sort of guerrilla filmmakers or whatever you like, the independent realm these days, is that the technology is settled. There is no churn of film technology. I mean, HD is a ripple on the surface. I mean, basically, the film production, the methodology of film production and the process involved is well understood. You might change the technology. This might have some marginal effect on it, might have some profound effect on output, but it's not difficult to do these days. It's easy to do. When you compare that to games, which, nobody quite knows what a game is. Nobody quite knows what it is. Nobody quite knows how to put it together, what's important, what's not important. There's no equivalent to the camera. Because and for that reason, the fact that there is no equivalent to the camera, I can't imagine that there's going to be an equivalent to the camera. I don't see games becoming going down the same sort of route. I think that user input will grow in things like Second Life, but that's a slightly different thing, it seems to me. That's just like a moss growing, isn't it? That's not saying here's the little man against the big man. It's like saying here are the hordes, and that's a very different thing. Yeah. So in terms of the other thing that was that you brought up, the other question about hyperreality, I'm assuming you mean by hyperreality this romanticization, this explosion, or this multiplication. Is that what you were meaning?
The search for ever more detail in an image of a person or a landscape.
Yeah, it's futile. It seems futile to me. I mean, it's because therein people think that you will find the truth, isn't it? And it seems to me.
Is it an absolutist stance and a relativist medium?
I think that it's not. I don't think it's. I think that because all mediums are relative, aren't they? All mediums are understood and consumed within the context that that they're presented. But I think that what it is foolish and paranoid, and based on the belief that we will be able to understand some nugget of truth if we've got everything laid out. And the point is, that's the same sort of mistake, which is why notions of emergence are really brilliant, because what emergence says is that if you take a flock of birds, as I understand it, you don't understand the movement of the flock by understanding the operation and mechanics of the bird itself. So if you apply that analogy to the search for ever finer detail, then you might begin to wonder whether it's worth it, because we're not going to uncover that truth by understanding, the particular frequency or array of pores on a forehead as opposed to on a chin, or the difference in specularity between a black skin and a white skin, or the difference in, you know, how we, you know, flush with embarrassment at times, and how those capillaries and sort of, you know, what are the systems behind that. This is a futile thing, which is why I think we should just always deal with a limit. We should always deal with a limit.
So given that, do you think there's any interest in the games world in using that definition to more abstract ends rather than based in a naturalistic?
No, not at all. I think that, well, abstract ends, I think abstract, yes, in terms of Pac-Man, if that's what you mean by abstract, absolutely. If you mean all of those early symbolic representations are fine, and like I was saying before, entirely adequate representations that were seeking to do something entirely different to what is being sought at the moment. Using Pac-Man, given the current set of unspoken goals, would be frankly ridiculous. But there is no reason why, you know, stylistically, you can obviously do pretty much everything. But games are, at the end of the day, you know, my understanding of games is that they are tactile experiences that rely on a certain degree of understanding and identification with something there on the screen. I think that stylistic abstraction would be fine, but actual abstraction, the playing around with the medium, I don't think games allow it. It breaks the game. It breaks the game. It's like going into chess, playing around with you know, chess is good because of what chess is. Games, in a wider sense, where we are good at what they do, they're just not very good at doing other things. They're not going to deal well with tragedy. They will never deal well with tragedy. They're not going to deal well with. They'll do quite good comedy. They'll do quite good comedy. They'll do. They're quite good at reason lots of fighting games because they're quite good at fighting sort of stuff. But they're not going to occupy. Neither are they, I think, going to invite questioning of those areas of human experience that other mediums do very well. Neither do I think they should. You know, I think it's fine that games do what they do. And, you know, this difference between, just to jump now back to sorts of things that you might represent, this difference between symbolic representation, iconic representation, is a really fascinating one. Obviously, language is a symbolic thing. You know, tree, the word, looks nothing like tree, the thing, or, you know, and back in the day when games were young, or chess, this is a fantastic symbolic game. It doesn't really matter what you've got there on you will all agree on it. You know, let's call trees blurts now. Let's all agree, yeah, blurt. No, that's what games were in the early day. That's how now. They've changed. We now operate within an entirely iconic world where the trees that we put on screen are judged in terms of their relation to particular trees, or maybe to idealised notions of trees, but more often than not to particular trees. And that's where the impulse towards detail comes, because people worried that we might get it wrong, and it's a kind of like a, you know, it's that sort of paranoia. Are we right? Are we wrong? And which is why at the beginning, when I was talking about HD, it seems entirely appropriate that you know, or HD seems entirely appropriate to our society these days, because we're worried all the time about getting things wrong, or about somebody lying to us or not lying to us, and we as developers, you know, take that responsibility, or that responsibility is implicit in what we do. It's so the question of, is hyperreality, is there any alternative? Yes, in theory, but no in practice.
There is no alternative. Let's stop. There is no alternative.